The construction of a basic development pro forma, it's two parts. There are uses of funds and sources of funds. On the uses side, generally that then is split into a couple of parts as well. Three parts on the uses side. Acquisition, meaning acquisition of land or acquisition of building, your hard costs, your actual cost to construct, and then any architectural fees and design. Those are the three components of a pro forma. And what you want to do, the first place you look is to make sure that all the numbers add up. So all the numbers on the sources or the uses of funds need to add up. So that the whole notion of the acquisition costs, the hard costs, it's called the soft costs. That's where the engineering, and all those costs are. They're in the soft costs. All those numbers need to add up. Well, boy, if those numbers aren't adding up, then you're going to have a problem. The other thing you want to do is do a reality check. You want to make sure that if you're in an environment where it costs, $120 a square foot to build, but yet your pro forma is showing something that's $50 a square foot to build, maybe the developer doesn't really know what they're doing. And so that's a telltale sign. Numbers don't add up or the numbers aren't real. A lot of what you want to do too in a pro forma, because things aren't perfect, it's just a snapshot, it's your best guess. You want to look to see whether or not your developer has built in a contingency, because in part you never want your developer to keep coming back to you for new sources of capital or do an oops. Just had an experience in my own community and in Columbia, Maryland, where the state awarded a piece of property to a developer who had this very intricate, elaborate development scheme to bring back a neighborhood village commercial center. And at the end of the day, he put in a pro forma that was too good to be true. And he came back to the state to ask for more money. And the state pretty much had to back away. But we wasted a year and a half of time where we could have been working with the developers ready to go. So the second part of this pro forma, I said uses of capital and then sources of capital. Normally on the sources of capital, you're dealing with two primary sources, equity, and you're dealing with debt. Most of the time when a developer comes to the public sector, he's trying to figure out how can I get a 100% subsidized deal? And that's a telltale sign that we're going to have some trouble, because you always want your developer to have some skin in the game. Depending upon where you are, depending upon the needs, that skin in the game could be 5%, 20%. In the United States, it's generally in the 20 to 30 or 40% range. And other places, in places like Europe, other places in Asia, a lot of times you'll have almost close to 100%, 90% equity deals and very little on the debt side. There are three forms on the sources. There would be equity, debt, and subsidy. My experience on the development side has primarily been those projects that were subsidized. So for the most part, when I saw a project working either for the city of Detroit, I also worked as the director of development for the city of Philadelphia in the redevelopment authority. Most of those were subsidized. And I will say there are all types of ways to subsidize. You can directly subsidize or you can subsidize through process. And there are a lot of developers who just get out of the way and just make sure I can get my permits on time, or make sure that you can provide me, whatever clearance that you need to provide me in a timely fashion. If I were to guess in terms of the amount of direct subsidy, the majority of real estate that gets developed is not subsidized real estate development. The majority of it, and that could be 70, 75, 70%, if not more, the majority of it's going to be privately controlled with debt and equity sources. In Detroit, we had something called the site plan review, because there are other things that go along in a development. There's the structure itself, it being built, it being financed by the private sector finance or private equity, but then there's all the infrastructure. So in many cases, when we built the new Tiger Stadium, or when we built some of those buildings downtown that you currently see in Detroit, a developer will come through something called the site plan review. And so in the site plan review, the developer's making certain promises in terms of putting their building on a plot of land. We're making certain promises with respect to sort of connecting the infrastructure. We need to see what the feasibility is. Now, there's not an in-depth review of the developer's pro forma, only to see, do the numbers add up? Does it make sense? What else are they requiring of us? And so you could see in some of those numbers, well, man, if the engineering is just going to the street line, I may need to do something else underneath the street in order to connect the buildings. It's not a thorough underwriting and review. It's more thorough if you're asking for subsidy. in many instances, a lot of that public infrastructure is provided by the public. If you're a cash-strapped municipality without the money, then you will end up negotiating with the developer. Or if the developer is really intent on getting into the ground, he might negotiate something with the city in order to provide that type of infrastructure. It really depends on the municipality. It depends on the developer. In some instances, you'll have more suburban development where that infrastructure just doesn't exist and is too cost prohibitive for the city or a county or even a state to provide for that infrastructure development.